Uganda and Kenya. Two leaders, two interesting parts. See, one of these leaders is extending his rule like adding water to milk, and the other does not know that his milk has expired. My name is Ashwin Berry. Welcome to Second Take. Let us talk about the president who mistook Uganda for a retirement plan. On June 24, 2025, in a moment more predictable than a pothole after Ugandan rain, the NRM confirmed what most citizens had already budgeted for. Emotionally, President Yoweri Museveni will run for a 7th term. Yes, the man who first seized power when Michael Jackson still had a nose now believes that Uganda needs one more round of his steady progress. If staying in power were a sport, Museveni would be a living gold medal, sipping tea while jogging laps around term limits like their suggestions in a buffet line. Having surgically removed both the age cap and term limits from the Constitution, like a dictator in denial with a pair of tweezers, Museveni now approaches 40 years of rule, as if governance is a family business and democracy is a suggestion from the West that needs filtering. His announcement to collect nomination forms, blessed via the NRM's website and a government video on X, formerly Twitter, now a public therapy session, was less of a surprise and more of a national sigh. After 4 decades, the man still insists on leading, despite Uganda's Gen Z loudly hinting that they'd like to vote for someone who doesn't use a fax machine. But power is a seductive fruit, and Museveni has taken more bites than Eden could withstand. Meanwhile, critics are not amused. The democratic dress that Uganda once wore now has so many tears and bullet holes, it might as well be vintage autocracy. Still, Museveni marches on, claiming national stability, while ignoring that his grip on power is the very earthquake shaking Uganda's democratic spine. With the 2026 election looming, the choice isn't between change and continuity, it's between freedom and one more season of Museveni, the extended cut. In the land of the Pearl of Africa, politics is no longer a contest of ideas, but a family heirloom passed down with military fanfare and a Twitter password. Enter General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, Museveni's son, Uganda's defense chief, and social media's most erratic warlord in waiting. While the president insists that he isn't grooming anyone, Muhoozi's rise is less subtle than a drumline in a library. After assuming command of the Uganda People's Defense Forces in 2024, he became the crown prince of repression, wielding surveillance units like toys in a sandbox and crafting policies that sound like a bad Netflix script. Civilians tried in military courts, opposition figures monitored by elite units, and vague laws signed with bold pens. If Museveni is Uganda's father figure, Muhoozi is the impatient son standing in the corner, warming up the dictatorship before his turn on the throne. His infamous 2023 tweet threatening to behead opposition leader Bobby Wine reads like Shakespeare rewritten by a warlord with bad Wi-Fi. Yet the silence from state institutions was deafening. A wink and a nod from a system where accountability is on indefinite leave. Uganda's civil society now operates like a prisoner on parole, watched, restrained, and occasionally beaten for good measure. Even the judiciary, once the last thread in the tapestry of democracy, yes, we avoided that word before, is now used to justify Museveni's whims, like allowing military trials for civilians, because civilian courts were apparently too merciful. The Constitutional Court's dissent now lives in exile, much like the opposition. Uganda's democracy isn't dead, it's sedated, tube-fed, and occasionally wheeled out for election season to waver diplomats. And Muhoozi, he's the anxious heir rehearsing in full uniform, tweeting threats while waiting for Dad to finally give him the keys. As Uganda inches towards the 2026 elections, Museveni's regime is reciting its greatest hits with the conviction of a wedding DJ whose forgotten people came for something new. In speeches full of fire and folklore, the president boasts of factories and fish farms, of industrial parks with names more elaborate than their outputs, and of youth programs that employ thousands on paper. The reality, however, tells a different tale. Youth unemployment smolders like a tire fire under a veneer of steady progress. Corruption, Uganda's oldest political party, thrives across ministries and boards, spinning taxpayer funds into invisible bridges and vanishing hospitals. The 2025 apology tour, where Museveni and First Lady Janet begged forgiveness for the government's shortcomings, was a theater production, so well rehearsed it could have sold out the National Theatre, if only the lights worked. And while the old man apologizes, the regime builds a fortress of loyal generals, hungry propaganda machines, and a narrative so thick not even foreign donors can navigate it without GPS. International observers warn of a democracy at a tipping point, but Museveni remains unbothered, sipping wisdom from his favorite book of Proverbs while Bobby Wine dodges police batons for singing the national anthem too loudly. Opposition figures are not merely political rivals. They are public enemies in slow motion. Dr. Kizza Besigye, forcibly returned from Kenya in 2023, now awaits a treason trial because in Uganda, attempting to lead is a capital offense. So the country waits, its youth restless, its future uncertain, its institutions repurposed for one man's survival. Museveni once promised liberation. Today, he promises continuity. In truth, all he delivers is the infinite encore of a song that ended years ago. And the people, they dance, not from joy, but because standing still in Museveni's Uganda might get you shot, or worse, noticed. Stay with us as we talk Kenya and William Ruto next.
It all began with ink on paper, a small but powerful voice that reached the homes of Namibians, sharing their stories, their triumphs, their struggles. As the world evolved, so did we. From the presses to your screens, keeping you connected to the news that matters, wherever you are. We didn't stop at digital. We brought the action to life on your screens, covering the moments that unite us all. We're not just a source of information. We're your partner in exploration, booking your stay, paying for your meals, and even sending your event tickets straight to your phone. Reaching over 1 million people daily, we are a fully integrated system, working together to make your life easier. Whether it's news, events, or everyday information, we've brought it all together. We're committed to empowering the next generation. Through partnerships and innovation, we're delivering education to every corner of Namibia. We've become so much more than news, more than information. We're here to help you enjoy everything Namibia has to offer. NTV, so much more than just television.
In the land of hustlers and handshakes, where promises grow faster than jobs and taxes chase citizens like unrelenting debt collectors, Kenya's political story between 2022 and 2025 has performed a masterpiece of disillusionment. From William Ruto's rise as the soft-styled son of struggle to the digital defiance of a generation armed with Wi-Fi and wariness, this is not the story of a coup. It's the story of a reckoning. A story carved from real blood, broadcast bans and hashtags that carry more weight than manifestos. Here, Gen Z didn't just reject a finance bill, they rewrote the script of resistance. Let's talk about it. In 2022, William Ruto promised Kenyans the political equivalent of avocados for all, creamy, affordable, and straight from the soil of hustler ambition. He swaggered into the presidency on the back of wheelbarrows and kitchen metaphors, preaching a bottom-up economic gospel that made the poor feel like spiritual co-authors of the national budget. Unfortunately, the only thing that trickled up was tax, and what trickled down was disdain. Ruto inherited a debt pile so tall you could wave at God from the top. But rather than address it with humility or reform, he treated it like another campaign podium. The man who claimed to be a son of poverty took to the skies in private jets, sipping elite nectar while Kenyans queued for unga. Fewer subsidies were scrapped with the indifference of a man deleting tweets. The youth were left staring at joblessness through the cracked screen of their borrowed smartphones, while the state pushed policies that looked suspiciously like elite resurrection. Somewhere between fertilizer scams and food prices that defied physics, the idea of a hustler nation curdled into a meme. The same Gen Z that once danced to Ruto's TikTok campaign stunts was now translating his finance bill into Sheng and Kikuyu, because nothing says rebellion like civic education in local dialects. And when Ruto called this treason, it wasn't clear whether he meant the protests or the fact that people finally read what Parliament was passing. One thing was certain. Kenya's youth weren't interested in coups. They wanted receipts, jobs, and the simple right not to be shot for existing. In Ruto, they had elected a hustler. What they got was a technocrat in hustler cosplay, playing Monopoly with lives and blaming the board when the dice refused to roll his way. We continue with the act. Let's get into our second act of the Kenya story. 2023 was the year of deja vu in Kenya. The protests returned, Raila Odinga dusted off his vuvuzela of dissent, and the streets filled with smoke, but not fire. The opposition's cries against the finance bill of 2023 were loud, passionate, and promptly neutered by handshake politics and ministerial appointments. Odinga's rallies resembled a reunion tour more than a revolution, complete with nostalgia, sound bites, and the recurring chorus, "We demand justice." But it was justice with a footnote: terms and conditions may apply. After some died, many marched, and tear gas filled lungs often more than words did ears, the protests quietly folded into the parliamentary wallpaper. Yet something lingered: disillusionment. The youth watched the elders fumble, compromise, and eventually join the very banquet they had decried. That's when the Gen Z decided enough of these dinosaur dramas. It was time to write a new script with memes, code switching, and strategy. No tribal whistles, no political mascots, just Wi-Fi, anger, and artificial intelligence. When Finance Bill 2024 tried to sneak in with taxes on everything short of breathing, it meant not a press conference, but a movement. young Kenyans built Google Docs for resistance and used ChatGPT like a digital griot. They translated policy into protest and hashtags into purpose. The state, long used to dealing with picketers and preachers, suddenly faced faceless fury. Ruto, still in campaign mode 2 years after the election, looked around for Raila, but found only the ghost of a generation that refused to be led or bought. In a country where youth unemployment was a ritual and police brutality a tradition, Gen Z didn't ask for a seat at the table. They overturned it. This wasn't the march of Raila. This was the algorithm uprising, and it couldn't be silenced by a ministry appointment. June 25, 2024 was not a coup. It was a clapback. The youth had read the finance bill. They had discussed it in WhatsApp groups, broken it down on Instagram lives, and turned its clauses into TikTok reels. So when the bill passed its second reading, 204 grinning MPs in suits voting to bleed a nation dry, Kenya didn't erupt. It ignited. Protesters stormed parliament, not to seize power, but to remind it who pays for their air conditioning. They torched vehicles and the Nairobi County Governor's office as if saying, if we can't afford to live, you can't afford to govern in peace. Ruto, seasoned in rhetorical overkill, declared it treason, a convenient word to crush dissent, borrowed from every autocrat's book. He deployed the military as if the protesters were a foreign threat and not citizens with receipts. The Law Society of Kenya called it unconstitutional. The government called it necessary. The protesters called it Tuesday. Amnesty International called it what it was, a bloodbath. Live bullets replaced dialogue, and abductions replaced press briefings. Even satire was criminalized. An AI-generated image of Ruto in a coffin became national security's top threat, apparently more dangerous than the budget deficit. But the real funeral was for democracy. Parliament became a bunker. The streets became a classroom. And in this upside-down republic, the educated were unemployed, the powerful unaccountable, and the government increasingly ungovernable. When Ruto reshuffled his cabinet weeks later, firing all but one minister and hiring old opposition faces, it was like changing the band on the Titanic and calling it innovation. Gen Z didn't want a new finance minister. They wanted a refund and an apology. They got neither. Just more tear gas, more hashtags, and more proof that in Kenya, public service is not about service. It's about survival for the rulers. By 2025, Kenya had to become fluent in a new dialect, the language of state paranoia. The government saw coups in cardboard signs, sedition in satire, and treason in TikTok trends. As June 25 approached, the first anniversary of the parliament storming, Ruto's administration braced itself for another insurrection. But what came was less cool and more communion. Young people marched with tree branches and placards chanting, "Ruto must go." Not because they had guns, but because they had grievances. 8 people died. 400 were injured. But the real casualty, once again, was the truth. Coup allegations resurfaced, this time allegedly funded by faceless elites on social media, possibly Martians too if the narrative had room. The Communications Authority tried to switch off live broadcasts. Protesters switched on VPNs. Rose Njeri, a teacher turned activist, was abducted for posting a civic education carousel on Instagram. What threat did she pose? Literacy, meanwhile, Ruto unveiled Nyota, A youth program so vague it could double as a perfume line. The World Bank offered funding, but Gen Z wanted results, not pilot projects. They had seen Kazim Tani. They remembered the apologies of the National Prayer Breakfast. Words were plenty, jobs were not. And as the government leaned harder into coup plot rhetoric, it only underscored its bankruptcy, not just of currency, but of credibility. There was no coup, just a country tired of being ignored, a generation with no seats at the table that they had built. And live-streamed the meeting. Ruto, once the hustler-in-chief, now looked like the monarch of misfires, ruling a digital nation with analog tools. His opponents weren't behind podiums. They were in threads, replies. And if power was once about fear, it now danced to the beat of the next trending hashtag. Kenya, June 2025. The parliament stands. The constitution breathes, shakily, like a patient recovering from state-sponsored pneumonia. The finance bill has been withdrawn. A new cabinet glimmers faintly with recycled ambition. Nyota promises 800,000 jobs, just as the sun promises to rise. But on the streets, it's still raining baton blows. Rosenjerry is missing again. Billy Mwangi tweets cautiously. And Gen Z, oh Gen Z, they're still here. Posting, marching, learning, coding, surviving. They have rejected tribalism, dynasties, and discount democracy. They don't want your job in 2029. They want your resignation now. Their protests are less about policy now and more about principle. They march not just for tax relief, but for dignity, for visibility, for the radical idea that citizenship is not conditional on silence. Meanwhile, Ruto walks a tightrope strung between international donors and domestic disbelief. His legitimacy, once enshrined by a court, is now tested daily by the streets. He governs by press release, apologizes by template, and rules through contradiction. He denies abductions and then blames the abductees. He rejects media bans while shutting off the signal. He promises jobs while hiring no one. Kenya, once a regional beacon, now flickers like a dying bulb in a hall of mirrors. But in the mirror, Gen Z sees themselves, and they refuse to look away. The real opposition is no longer Odinga. It's a protest in 40 counties, a live stream from a phone in Kibra, a meme that Ruto's PR team can't delete fast enough. If this is a coup, it's a coup of conscience. If this is treason, it's treason against mediocrity. And if Kenya falls again, it will not be from an uprising. It will be from its leaders' refusal to listen to a generation that simply wants a future that doesn't come with a tear gas invoice. So, here we are, June 2025, and Kenya stands not in revolution, but in unresolved rebellion. The finance bill may be gone, but the fire isn't. Gen Z has no leader, no tribe, no party, but they have memory, and it's long. Every bullet fired, every activist abducted, every denial from the dais has been archived, hashtagged, and reposted. The government speaks of peace while pointing rifles. The youth speak of justice while building futures in code. This isn't just protest, it's prophecy. A generation demanding not regime change but value, not handouts but honesty, not slogans but structural reform. And if Ruto listens, perhaps there's hope. If not, well, hashtags don't bleed, but they never forget. And this generation, they're not logging off anytime soon. My name is Ashwin Betty. That's been Second Take.